I think let's unpack this. What if uh, everything you thought you knew about Adam and Eve,
Mhm.
the serpent, what if it was like an oversimplification? Today we're diving into a really fascinating reinterpretation of the human fall. It's drawn from divine principle, the basic teachings of Reverend son Young Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, specifically the 1996 translation of the exposition. And in this text, divine principle means, well, it's the fundamental divine laws, right?
Yeah.
God's truths for creation and his ideal for humanity. Our mission here in this deep dive is basically to pull out the most important insights from these sources, maybe challenge some long-held assumptions, give you a fresh perspective on the root of sin and its profound consequences as presented in this text. Get ready for some aha moments, maybe. Might
Yeah.
just change how you view humanity's beginnings.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how this text approaches that foundational story, the Garden of Eden. And it doesn't treat it as like a literal account in every single detail. It's more like a symbolic roadmap,
Hmm.
to understanding our deepest human struggles and the origin of evil forces, which it identifies as Satan. It offers a completely new lens, really.
Let's jump right into what this deep dive tells us is the actual root of sin then.
Yeah.
Many of us, we grew up with the idea of Adam and Eve eating a forbidden fruit. But this text suggests that's symbolic, not literal.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The divine principle argues against a literal interpretation. It poses some compelling questions, like, would a loving God truly create a tempting fruit that causes death, really? And how could just eating something transmit sin through generations, fundamentally altering human linears and being passed down through blood ties? The text suggests a much more profound, inheritable act must be at play, something that could truly change our very nature.
That really reframes things. Okay, so in the garden story, we also have those iconic symbols, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. How does this deep dive reinterpret them?
Well, the text presents the tree of life as symbolizing a perfected man, Adam, the ideal man, one who would have fully realized God's ideal of creation. In fact, it identifies Jesus as this ultimate tree of life, and it states that humanity's hope is to be spiritually engrafted with him. It even goes to Revelation, where the tree of life symbolizes Christ at his second coming, arriving to redeem original sin.
Okay.
So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then, is seen as symbolizing Eve, a woman who likewise would have realized God's ideal for creation. It's a powerful way to kind of personify these spiritual ideals.
Right, so let's turn to a really pivotal figure, the serpent. The text offers a pretty challenging reinterpretation of its identity, doesn't it?
It really does. Drawing from Revelation 12.9, the text asserts the serpent wasn't an animal at all. It was the ancient serpent, who's called the devil and Satan, a spiritual being.
A spiritual being.
Yes, identified as Lucifer, an archangel who later fell. So the biblical description of forked tongue twisting around prey that's seen as symbolic of this angel's deceitful nature, his ensnaring actions, not a literal snake.
Okay, not a little snake. And what about the act itself, the eating of the fruit? If it wasn't a real fruit, what did Adam and Eve actually do that became the original sin?
This brings up a really important question the text tackles head on. Why did Adam and Eve cover their lower parts with fig leaves after the fall? Genesis 3.7. If they'd just eaten fruit, why there?
Good point.
The text argues this points to their shame stemming from an illicit sexual act. It states that the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil symbolizes Eve's love, and eating it means she consummated a satanic love relationship with the archangel, Lucifer.
Satanic love, meaning?
Meaning a connection rooted in self-centered desire, not God's pure design. It bound her in spiritual and, the text suggests, blood ties to him. Then she spread her sin through an untimely conjugal relationship with Adam before they were ready, outside God's plan. This act, that became the original sin, transmitted through lineage, inheritable. This perspective helps explain why many religions emphasize chastity, maybe, and why rites like circumcision, which the text mentions, are seen to symbolically represent a kind of purification, like draining this inherited contamination, aiming to restore a connection to God. It's not about literal blood, but the spiritual lineage.
Wow. That completely reframes the whole idea of how sin entered the world. So if the root was this illicit sexual relationship, starting with an angel, let's unpack the motivation.
Sure.
What drove Lucifer, this archangel, down that path?
The text delves deep into the nature of angels first. They were created before humans, meant to be God's retiers, to minister to humans. In fact, humans, as God's children, were meant to rule over the angels.
Rule over angels, okay.
Lucifer, the archangel, had kind of monopolized God's love in the angelic world. He was top dog, so to speak. But when God created humans, he loved them even more, put them at the center. Lucifer saw this shift, felt a decrease in the love and attention he received, a bit like the workers in the vineyard parable, maybe, Matthew 20.
Right, feeling slighted.
Exactly. He felt underloved, overlooked, and he wanted to usurp that position, grasp the same central role in human society he'd had among the angels. At its core, it was profound envy and a desire to, elevate his own position above God's will.
So powerful motivations.
Huh?
Envy, desire for control. How does the text describe the actual process of the fall? Was it just one moment or more complex?
It was definitely more complex. Describe it as a two-stage fall. The text distinguishes between a spiritual fall and a physical fall.
Okay, spiritual first.
Yes. The spiritual fall happened through that illicit sexual relationship between Lucifer and Eve. Lucifer, driven by envy and, captivated by Eve's maturing beauty, seduced her. Eve, still spiritually immature, wanted to open her eyes and become like God, like Genesis says. She desired that knowledge, that power, before the right time.
Before she was ready.
Right. Their unprincipled love, deviating from God's design, rooted in self-centeredness, generated a spiritual sexual union. This left Eve with a guilty conscience, a sense of dread, and this new but fallen wisdom that Adam was actually her intended spouse.
And the physical fall then involved Adam.
Correct. Eve, now fallen, overwhelmed by dread and guilt. She then seduced Adam, who was also still immature, not perfected. This untimely conjugal relationship in satanic love outside God's timing, tainted by Lucifer's influence that constituted the physical fall.
So Adam inherited it from Eve.
Exactly. Adam inherited the fallen elements Eve got from the archangel, and this became the original sin, passed down to all generations, perpetuating Satan's lineage effectively. What really stands out when you think about it is how deeply intertwined the spiritual and physical acts are here, shaping humanity's destiny, creating this legacy of sin, both inherited and well-chosen.
This deep dive also offers a really fascinating insight about God's creation, stating that the power of love is actually stronger than the power of the principle. That feels counterintuitive to a lot of thinking.
It does, doesn't it? The text explains that God created love to be stronger than the principle, that sort of foundational cosmic law, because God governs us through love, not just rigid rules. Love is presented as the source of life, of real happiness. If the principle, just sticking to rules, were stronger, people would pursue rules over God's love, a genuine heart-to-heart relationship. Impossible. Think about Jesus with his disciples. The text uses that example. He taught truth, yes, but it was his unwavering love that truly saved and transformed them.
So if love is so powerful, so foundational, why did God give Adam and Eve that commandment, do not eat of the fruit? Wasn't that a rule, a principle?
That command was given specifically to immature human beings, precisely because the power of unprincipled love could lead them astray before they'd fully matured. It was a crucial condition, a way for them to cultivate faith, responsibility during their growth period.
Makes sense.
Had they obeyed, their connection with God's principled love would have matured. It would have protected them from the archangel's unprincipled, seductive love. The commandment was only binding while they were immature. Once perfected in God's ideal, their bond in God's absolute love would have been unbreakable. The prohibition wouldn't have been needed.
This really does challenge assumptions, but it also brings up that huge question, the classic theological puzzle this text tackles directly. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, why didn't he just step in, prevent the fall?
It's a profound question, absolutely. And the text gives 3 compelling reasons. But the really powerful insight here, I think, is how this framework shows God's absolute commitment to human freedom and responsibility, even to the point of watching, as the text says, with trepidation. It kind of redefines omnipotence not just as raw power, but as a love that upholds the very principles of creation.
Okay, what are those reasons then?
First, God didn't intervene to maintain the absoluteness and perfection of the principle of creation. He gave humans a portion of responsibility during their growth period, a time of indirect dominion. They were still maturing, responsible for their choices, not yet under his complete direct guidance.
So intervening would undermine his own rules.
Exactly. It would ignore human responsibility and undermine his own principle. Second, to ensure that God alone be the creator. If God stepped into unprincipled acts, it would effectively sanction them, give them value as his creations. It would make Satan, who manipulated things, a kind of co-creator of a new principle.
Wow, okay.
And third, to make human beings the lords of creation. Humans have to earn the qualifications to rule all things, inherit God's creative nature by fulfilling their responsibility. Intervention would have just granted authority to the unqualified. So God watched, with trepidation, yes, but he respected the principle in human freedom.
That's a powerful thought, maybe even unsettling for some.
Yeah.
God intentionally limiting his own intervention out of respect for our responsibility. It definitely shifts the view of divine love and justice. So what were the bigger consequences for all of humanity, for the universe even?
Well, the text states the archangel Lucifer, after his fall, became Satan. And through that illicit relationship with Eve and Adam, humanity effectively became children of Satan, operating under Satan's sovereignty. That's why the Bible calls him the ruler of this world.
Right.
And consequently, all of creation itself groans in travail, like Paul writes in Romans, longing for unfallen people to appear and, vanquish Satan's influence. It paints a picture of a universe deeply affected by this one event.
And how does Satan operate now? According to this text, how does his influence actually manifest in the world?
Satan is always active, constantly accusing people, and he needs object partners.
Object partners.
Essentially, individuals or groups who align with his will. They act as channels for his influence on Earth. These can be evil spirits, whose activities then manifest through the physical selves of evil people. And this raises a critical point. If Satan needs these partners, then our role, humanity's role, in choosing to cut off that connection with Satan and restore our connection with God, it's absolutely crucial for salvation.
Oh, it hinges on our choices.
Yes. The text explains God gave humans and angels freedom. Restoration can't be forced. We have to voluntarily uphold God's word.
What's also compelling is its unique take on good and evil. How did it redefine those concepts?
It redefines them not by, say, arbitrary rules, but by their purpose. An act is good if it serves God's will, helps form a God-centered foundation. It's evil if it serves Satan's will, deviates from that divine purpose.
Even desire.
Even desire, often seen as sinful, right? But here it's viewed as God-given, necessary for joy. If it aligns with God's purpose, it's good. This implies that even a fallen world, full of human desires, can be restored to goodness if its direction, its purpose, changes. It also means goodness has been kind of relative throughout history, shifting with different doctrines, different goals, until Christ's second advent establishes God's absolute truth and standard of goodness.
And the kinds of sin we carry, how are they categorized?
The text outlines 4 distinct types. First, original sin, the root sin, inherited directly from Adam and Eve. Then, hereditary sin passed down through lineage, generation after generation. Third is collective sin. That's group responsibility. Like the crucifixion of Jesus, a community or nation bears responsibility.
Okay.
And finally, individual sin committed by one person. But it emphasizes that original sin is the underlying root of all the others. And only Christ, as the true parent of humanity, can truly uproot it from our lineage.
You mentioned 4 key characteristics of this fallen nature we inherited. We touched on reversing dominion, the angel dominating Eve, Eve dominating Adam and multiplying the criminal act, Eve spreading sin to Adam. Can you dig into the other 2 a bit more? Failing to take God's standpoint and leaving one's proper position.
Absolutely. Failing to take God's standpoint, that means viewing others not through love, not understanding their divine value, but through envy, possessiveness, a self-centered lens. Sort of like how Lucifer saw Adam and Eve through his own jealousy, not through God's love for his children.
Right, I see that.
And leaving one's proper position refers to that desire to step outside your designated role, striving for more than what's principled, driven by that same envy or desire for power. Just like Lucifer sought to elevate his status beyond what was given, these tendencies, even subtle envy or self-centeredness, they're inherent in our fallen nature, according to this text. But in an ideal world, they'd be channeled differently, into spurring human progress, healthy ambition, instead of causing falls.
It's really striking when you realize how those ancient characteristics play out in our lives today. Office politics, global conflicts. This isn't just theology from long ago. It feels like a mirror reflecting ongoing human issues.
It really does.
Now, freedom seems to play such a complex role here. In the fall, but also in our potential restoration. What does true freedom mean from this perspective?
True freedom in this context has 3 key characteristics. 1, it exists within the principle. It aligns with God's laws and purposes. 2, it comes with responsibility, acknowledging the consequences of our choices. And 3, it strives for accomplishment that brings joy to God.
Okay.
The freedom of our original sinless mind, it would never deviate from the principle. It would be inherently responsible, always seeking good results. So the text is very clear. Freedom itself didn't cause the fall.
So if freedom wasn't the cause, what was it? What pushed them over the edge?
Well, Eve was free to interact with the archangel, yes. But her immature heart and intellect, They were just overwhelmed by Lucifer's seductive power, his unprincipled love. The freedom of her original mind actually generated, the text says, fear and foreboding, an internal warning sign that she was stepping outside God's design. But the power of unprincipled love between her and the archangel was stronger. It pushed her over the brink. The fall, tragically, meant humanity lost its true principled freedom, traded it for a false sense of liberation that really just brought bondage.
But despite losing that true freedom, the text also talks about this enduring yearning for freedom and humanity. How does that fit?
Yes, exactly. Even fallen people, we retain a seed of our original nature that deeply seeks true freedom. This explains our historical aspirations for liberty, doesn't it? Even driving revolutions, sacrifice. This longing for freedom is seen as part of God's ongoing providence of restoration, his plan to bring us back.
Ah, so it's part of the recovery process.
Right. By relating with God in freedom, by following words of truth, we can gradually revive our original nature, rediscover true liberation. This deep dive suggests our universal quest for freedom is ultimately a journey back to our intended, principled relationship with God, a profound spiritual longing really woven into us.
So freedom isn't just doing whatever we want.
No, it's about aligning our will with the highest good. And maybe those struggles for freedom throughout history, they can be seen as echoes of that deep spiritual desire to return.
Wow. We've really covered a huge amount of ground today, exploring this profound reinterpretation of the human fall according to the divine principle. We've seen the traditional story reframed, revealing a spiritual and physical illicit act as the root of sin, passed down through lineage. We've looked at the surprising motivations of an envious archangel, that two-stage fall process, and the deep reasons why God, despite knowing everything, didn't directly intervene.
And we considered how love's power, while life-giving, can be stronger than the principle, needing God's command for protection when we're immature. We saw how sin is consified, how that fallen nature shows up in specific ways in our lives. And finally, that nuanced role of freedom in the fall, yes, but also in our enduring path back to restoration. This deep dive really does offer a complete, complex framework, challenges and expands conventional views on a pivotal moment.
So what does this all mean for you listening? This reinterpretation really challenges us to look beyond maybe simplistic explanations for human failings, to consider the deep inherited roots of our struggles. It even gives a unique angle on Satan's origin and his ongoing influence. It's pretty striking to think the core of human struggle might stem from unprincipled love, a broken lineage, impacting everything from personal choices to global events. It really makes you wonder, if the root of sin is truly tied to these profound inherited dynamics, how does that shift our understanding of personal responsibility? And what does it really take to build a genuinely unfallen world?